In the Appalachian Mountains, there were two sounds. One was the
lot of
sound
money
of a
for a little
guitar,
song,
like the
Silas.
breath of God himself.
I know.
The other was the sound of money, thick with the world's greed. A man believed he had spent his life hearing only the first sound. His songs were poor, but his soul was richer than any king's. But the second sound was always there, just behind his back, waiting for the perfect moment to tempt him with its sweetest voice. This is the story of a war for one man's soul, fought between those two sounds. Deep in the hollows of the Appalachian Mountains, where the morning mist wraps around the waste of the ancient forest like a bandage, lived Silas Blackwood. More famous than his name was the sound that flowed from the fingertips of his old acoustic guitar. That sound was like the very spirit of the mountains, deep, honest, and grooved like the rings of a centuries-old tree. His songs weren't polished. They were raw, rugged, and filled with the unvarnished voices of the mountain folk, the ache of hard labor, the yearning for God despite it all, and the feeling of being lost somewhere in between. All he had was a creaky rocking chair on his worn-out porch, a hand-me-down Martin guitar from his grandfather, and a wellspring of songs in his heart that never ran dry. He didn't want for more. He was content with what he had. The smell of the forest at dawn, the feel of a handful of dirt, the color of the evening sunset, and the fact that he could pour it all into a song that was enough to make his life full. Every Sunday, he'd drive his beat-up pickup truck to the little Baptist church on the hill. There, he led the worship. When his rough-hewn voice sang Amazing Grace, a peace like a river flowed over the cold dusted faces of the miners and etched away the worry lines around the eyes of the weary women. His prayer was always the same. Lord, let my song be yours, and don't let the noise of the world steal my heart. I don't ask for riches or fame, just let me be grateful for the little things you've given me. His life was a quiet prayer, a slow-played folk song. Then, one hot summer day, a stranger whose car had broken down hitched a ride in his truck. He was a big-shot record producer from Nashville named Julian King. In the cab of the truck, Julian heard Silas humming a tune to himself and felt a chill run down his spine. He felt like he'd just discovered a diamond in the rough, a diamond in this simple mountain man. He smelled two things in Silas's voice at once: authenticity and money. After Silas dropped him off, Julian stayed for the church service. That day, Silas's song filled the chapel with a depth and a pain that was almost holy. After the service, Julian approached him and handed him a business card. "You've got $1 million voice in you, friend," Julian said with a slick smile. "It's a crime to let it rot away in a place like this. Come to Nashville. I'll make you a star." The offer seeped into Silas's pure heart like a sweet poison. That night, Silas couldn't sleep. Julian's voice and the sound of the old church organ swirled in his head. He went to see his old mentor, Elijah, the blind organist. "A man from Nashville says he wants to buy my songs. I was thinking, maybe I could comfort more people with my music." Elijah said nothing, his fingers tracing the keys of the organ. Then, he spoke softly. "Silas, the snake always hides in the prettiest flower garden. The world doesn't want your song, son. It wants the money your song can make. The moment your song becomes bigger than you, you'll lose your way. Remember, a heart that's content with what God has given is the greatest treasure of all." Silas was torn. But a small part of him, a tiny, flickering ambition, yearned to see his talent on a bigger stage. He told himself he could help more people, help his poor hometown. He rationalized that maybe this was a bigger opportunity from God himself. A few days later, with nothing but his grandfather's old guitar slung over his shoulder, Silas boarded a bus bound for Nashville. From the window of the church on the hill, with eyes that could not see, Elijah stood and listened as the sound of the bus faded into the distance. Nashville's Broadway was a different kind of jungle from the forest paths of Silas's home. Neon signs, bright as day even at midnight, blinded him. Every bar blared with loud music and cheers, each one competing to be heard. It was there that Silas was reborn as Blackwood. At first, it was all a dream. Julian King was a genius at packaging his raw authenticity as a commodity. The first album, Songs from the Mountain, was recorded to preserve as much of Silas's rugged voice and old guitar sound as possible. The critics raved, calling it the return of the most American voice. The album sold like wildfire. He became a star overnight. But with the second album, Julian slowly began to mix money into his music. "Silas, we've sold enough of your pain," Julian would say. People want to have fun now. Let's make it brighter, more upbeat. Silas's raw guitar riffs were polished with slick electric sounds and drum machines. His deep lyrics were replaced with stories about trucks, beer, and easy Friday night love. Silas protested, but Julian just smiled and pointed to the contract. This is business, my friend. People love your voice, not your philosophy. Silas started to believe him. He began to love money, and he wanted more of it. He completely forgot how to be content with what he had. The money poured in like a flood. He hit #1 on the Billboard country charts, clutched a Grammy trophy, and became the owner of the most lavish mansion in Tennessee. His garage was lined with gleaming sports cars, his closets filled with designer clothes. He no longer played his grandfather's old Martin guitar. The walls of his home were decorated with dozens of rare, limited edition guitars in glass cases, but his hands never touched them. For him, guitars were no longer tools for music, but ornaments to display his wealth. His soul was slowly dying amidst all the splendor. His songs lost the smell of the mountains, and the honesty of the dirt. In its place was the reek of whiskey, cologne, and emptiness. He felt a suffocating loneliness even in the roaring cheers of a sold-out stadium. Tens of thousands of fans screamed his name, but he felt like none of them were seeing the real Silas. They were just cheering for Blackwood, a well-crafted product. His own face on the giant screens felt alien. He loathed the man he saw lip-syncing to perfectly produced tracks under the bright lights. He had everything, but he wasn't happy for a single moment. He desperately missed the peace of those days, sitting on his old porch swing, just listening to the wind. One night, at an awards show after-party, a reporter asked him, "Mr. Blackwood, what's the secret to your success? You're a man who has it all now." Silas held his whiskey glass and stared into space for a moment. Then he laughed bitterly. "Have it all? No. I've lost it all. I lost my song, and I sold my soul. That's the secret to my success." His answer was lost in the noise of the party, dismissed as a joke. But it was the most honest scream his soul had ever let out. The owner of the $1 million voice now felt his voice wasn't worth a single dime. It was the final night of the national tour. Madison Square Garden in New York was roaring, an ocean of 20,000 voices chanting Blackwood. Below the stage, a galaxy of cell phone lights twinkled, but to Silas, they looked like cold, empty shards of glass. The grand intro to his biggest hit, Friday Night Ride, thundered through the arena. The crowd went wild, but Silas just stood there, staring blankly at the microphone. He couldn't sing. The lyrics wouldn't come. No, the very act of spitting out those words felt like a betrayal of his own soul. No sound came from his mouth. The music played on, but the crowd's roar slowly turned to a confused murmur. Silas closed his eyes for a moment. An image of the Appalachian forest flashed in his mind. The little church on the hill, and the sound of Elijah's voice. "The moment your song becomes bigger than you, you'll lose your way." Suddenly, he pulled the microphone from its stand and dropped it to the floor with a heavy thud. Without a word, he turned his back and walked off the stage, disappearing into the darkness. That night, the legendary country star Blackwood vanished. Silas left everything behind. The multi-million-dollar lawsuits for breach of contract, the storm of media criticism, the outrage of his fans. He turned his back on it all and fled to his old cabin in the Appalachians. But there was nothing there to welcome him. The house was derelict, the porch swing broken. In a corner of the living room, the old Martin guitar he had abandoned sat under a thick layer of dust, staring at him as if in judgment. He picked it up with a trembling hand. But his fingers, now soft and accustomed to the easy life in Nashville, were stiff. The clear, resonant notes of old were gone. He opened his mouth to sing, but only a choked, breathy sound escaped. He had lost his song. The one vessel that had ever held his soul was shattered. He felt utterly abandoned by the world, and by himself. He believed God had punished him for his pride by taking away the one thing that mattered. In his despair, he bought a bottle of the cheapest, harshest whiskey from the town store and drank himself into a stupor on the floor of his empty porch. The days blurred into a cycle of drinking and sleeping. His only companions now were silence and self-loathing. After what felt like an eternity, in the faint light of a new dawn, a distant sound drifted to him on the wind. A faint hymn. It was a melody from far away, yet so deeply familiar. It was coming from the little church on the hill. He staggered to his feet and, as if in a trance, started walking toward the sound. His bare feet were cut by the cold earth and sharp stones, but he felt no pain. The church door was closed, but a sliver of light and sound escaped from a crack in the old wood. He peered inside. In the empty sanctuary, his old mentor, the blind organist Elijah, sat alone at the dusty organ, playing and singing to himself. It was the very same hymn he had played for Silas on the day he left. "Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have." The words pierced Silas's heart. He collapsed right there, a guttural, animal-like sob tearing from his throat. He had forgotten. His song had never been his own to begin with. The one who had abandoned him wasn't the world or God, but himself, the man who had loved money and forsaken what he truly had. Hearing his cries, Elijah stopped playing. And with eyes that could not see, he turned quietly toward the broken soul weeping in the darkness. Silas crawled into the church and fell at Elijah's feet. "I've lost everything, Elijah," he wept. "My voice, my song. God has completely abandoned me." The blind man stopped playing and turned his head toward the broken soul weeping in the darkness. In the sound of Silas's cries alone, Elijah could read the entire story, the glory, the fall, and the agonizing pain of this very moment. He waited in silence, letting Silas pour out every last tear. When the sobs finally quieted, Elijah's warm, low voice filled the empty chapel. "No, Silas. God did not abandon you. The scripture says that he himself has said, 'I will never leave you nor forsake you.'" Elijah leaned against the old organ and continued. "Even when you were on that glittering Nashville stage, selling your soul, he was right there beside you, waiting for you inside the very song you thought you'd lost. Even when you left him, he never left you for a single moment. What you lost wasn't your voice, son. It was a grateful heart. That first heart, the one that knew how to be content with what you have." In that instant, a revelation struck Silas like lightning. The Grammy, the mansion, the millions of dollars. It was all a mirage, here one moment and gone the next. What he truly had were the things that had been there all along, the Appalachian mountains and forests. The old guitar, and the very talent that allowed him to sing about it all. And at the foundation of everything was God's unwavering promise to never leave him, no matter who he became or where he went. He had forgotten that promise and had chased the empty promises of the world instead. Silas slowly lifted his head. The tears had stopped. In his empty eyes, a tiny spark began to glow. From that day on, Silas Blackwood never went back to Nashville. The world speculated he was dead or living as a hermit, but in the lowest of places, he began to rebuild his life. He cleaned the church with Elijah and did odd jobs for the townspeople. And he sat on his old porch again, and he picked up his grandfather's guitar. At first, his fingers were so stiff he could barely form a chord. His voice came out as a rough croak. But he didn't give up. He was no longer singing for the Billboard charts. He was singing for the morning mountain mist, for the sound of the creek, and for the one who had never abandoned him. One afternoon, he found himself humming a new melody. And to that melody, the story of his entire life began to attach itself as lyrics: the foolishness of loving money, the emptiness of having it all, the despair of being forsaken, and finally, the gratitude for a promise that never broke. His song became real again. It was deeper now, more pained, and because of that, it held a greater comfort. Instead of loving money, he sang of his true possessions, his broken life, and the faithful God who held him through it all. That Sunday, for the first time in years, Silas stood on the pulpit of the little church on the hill. The congregation whispered at the sight of his ragged appearance. But the moment he struck the first chord on his old guitar and sang the first note, all noise in the church ceased. His song was not the last song marking the end of his career. It was the first hymn announcing the redemption of his wounded soul. When he finished, a hush fell over the church, soon broken by quiet sobs and a chorus of heartfelt amens. People no longer called him the $1,000,000 voice. Instead, they called him the one who sings of God's promise. And Silas Blackwood, in the mountains and hollows of Appalachia, spent the rest of his life living up to that name. Hello. This is Silas. Thank you for listening to my song, a journey that took me from the world's highest peaks to its lowest valleys. I used to believe that having more would make me happy. More money, more fame, more fancy guitars. But when I finally had it all, I had completely lost my soul. Perhaps you, too, are living with the thought, if only I had one more thing. If today, God were to promise you one of two things, Which would you choose? A. The ability to gain more of what you desire. B. The peace to be content with what you already have. There is no right answer. After all, I am the man who chose A and lost everything. Please share your choice and your reasons in the comments. I want to hear where your heart is leading you. I pray that your life may always rest in the greatest promise of all, that you will never be forsaken.